Let me start by saying I knew better. I really, really did. We all have that one line we promise ourselves we'll never cross, right? Mine was simple. Absolutely no drama involving my roommate's family, especially not his older sister, Maya. She was the chaos in his calm, and I was strictly team calm. But then, the text came. I was sitting in my worn-out, hand-me-down armchair, trying to pretend I was studying for my final exams. The clock read 1:17 a.m. My roommate, Alex, was snoring away, loud enough to rattle the cheap window panes of our off-campus apartment. Everything was exactly as it should be, boring, predictable, and safe. That's how I liked it. My phone buzzed on the desk. One text, unknown number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was a random group chat message, but then I noticed the profile picture. A blurry, close-up shot of an iris, deep hazel, unmistakable. It was Maya. I opened the message. It was 4 words, maybe the 4 most unsettling words I've ever received in my life. It didn't ask a question. It didn't explain. It just commanded, "Come upstairs, but don't knock." My heart went from a low, steady thrum to a frantic drum solo against my ribs. Up until that point, my interactions with Maya had been few and far between, and always highly supervised. She was 5 years older than us, lived in a penthouse apartment 3 floors up that Alex swore was paid for by a totally legitimate tech consulting job, and she moved through life like a lightning strike. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was dangerous in the way some people just are. The way she looked at you wasn't casual. It felt like an inspection. I glanced at Alex, still sawing logs, oblivious to the small, vibrating square in my hand that held a complete shift in my evening, maybe my whole life. I thought about the rule. I thought about the consequences. I thought about the look of utter disappointment Alex would give me if he ever found out I had gotten involved in one of Maya's signature situations. But the thing about Maya was, when she called, it didn't feel optional. It felt like destiny tapping you on the shoulder, demanding you turn around. This wasn't a casual invitation for a late-night chat. This was secretive. It was urgent. And it was happening in the middle of the night, 3 floors above us. What could possibly be so important, so sensitive, that she couldn't risk a knock? I stood up, the old armchair groaning in protest. I took 2 silent steps toward the door, my mind racing. Was this a game? Was she in trouble? Or, maybe worst of all, was she setting me up? I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly, realizing that in about 30 seconds, I was going to break the one rule I'd sworn to uphold. I had to go. I just had to know. But as I opened the door, a thought chilled me to the bone. What if Alex wasn't just sleeping? What if he was pretending? I pulled the door closed behind me, leaving Alex's rhythmic snoring as the only sound in the dark hallway. Now, I was standing in the corridor, alone, staring at the dimly lit stairwell. I had the text, the command, "Come upstairs, but don't knock." I had the absolute certainty that this was a terrible idea. But as I started my climb, moving like a shadow, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't climbing to a secret. I was climbing into one. And the moment I got to that 3rd-floor landing, what would I find waiting for me? The tension was already thick enough to chew on, even before I hit the first flight of stairs. To understand why those 3 flights felt like walking across a minefield, you need to know a little about Alex and Maya, and how I fit into their extremely complicated orbit. Alex, my roommate, was the definition of predictable stability. We met freshman year in philosophy class. He liked logic, I liked structure. We bonded over shared schedules and mutual distrust of anyone who used the phrase, "live your best life." He was a straight A student, kept our kitchen spotless, and treated his sister Maya's existence like a complicated, expensive appliance that was prone to breaking and should generally be avoided. He loved her, sure, but he kept her at a respectful, and frankly, terrified distance. Maya was the inverse. She dropped out of 3 different universities, claimed she was finding herself, and then somehow landed in this ridiculous luxury apartment building across the street from our humble student dump. She was the kind of person who wore expensive perfume just to stay in and watch bad reality TV. She was magnetic, witty, and had this habit of making you feel like you were the only interesting person in the room, right up until she dismissed you with a wave of her hand. My relationship with her was essentially 0. We'd shared maybe 5 conversations in the year I'd lived with Alex. They were always sharp, slightly flirtatious, and left me feeling like I'd just survived an interview for a job I wasn't qualified for. Alex had warned me, constantly. She is drama, man. Serious, capital D drama. Do not engage. Do not look her in the eye. Do not, under any circumstances, do her a favor. His warnings echoed in my head as I reached the second landing, my cheap sneakers silent on the carpeted stairs. I remembered the last time I'd seen her. It was maybe a week ago. She'd stopped by to grab a set of keys Alex had. She was wearing sunglasses indoors and looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, but still managed to look impossibly glamorous. As she left, she paused at our door, looked me dead in the eye, and whispered, "Sometimes, the quiet ones are the most interesting." It was a throwaway line, but it had stayed with me, unsettling me. Now, as I climbed, I started putting together the pieces of the current setup. Alex had been acting weird for a week. Distracted, on edge. He'd been taking late-night calls outside, whispering into the phone, claiming it was just his part-time job as a research assistant, but his eyes told a different story. Then, just yesterday, a strange black sedan with heavily tinted windows had been parked outside our building for nearly 6 hours. I had shrugged it off as nothing. Alex had watched it from behind the blinds, his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Was this connected? Was Maya in some kind of serious trouble? I rejected the idea of trouble, opting instead for a melodramatic prank. But the urgency of the text, don't knock asterisk, felt too real for a joke. It implied someone else was near. Someone who shouldn't hear me arrive. I finally reached the third-floor landing. The hallway was silent, dimly lit by a single ornate fixture. I stood outside Maya's door, my chest tight. This wasn't just a favor. This felt like an accomplished job. I raised my hand to the door, hesitating. I had to assume someone was inside, and they couldn't know I was there. If I was helping her, I needed to know what I was getting into. But the door was thick, and I couldn't hear a thing. So, I stood there, heart hammering, hand inches from the cool metal of the doorknob. If she needed help, I couldn't just stand here. I had to follow the instructions. But as I took a deep breath to push the door open, I heard a sound, not from inside Maya's apartment, but from the stairwell above me. It was a slow, deliberate creak, like someone heavy was making their way down, very, very slowly, right toward my position. I froze. Was it the person Maya was trying to hide from? Or was it someone completely different who was about to catch me standing here? The creak from the stairs above snapped me out of my paralyzing fear. Instinct took over. I couldn't risk being seen lurking outside Maya's door, especially not by a potentially hostile third party. I pushed the fear down, shoved the door open just enough to slip inside, and then closed it with an agonizing slowness, taking care not to let the latch click. I was in. The apartment was vast, dark, and silent. The air smelled of something expensive and faintly metallic, like rain on a high-end car. My eyes struggled to adjust, but I could make out the shapes of minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I was expecting panic, maybe a whispered plea for help, but there was nothing. "No, Maya. Maya," I whispered, my voice a dry croak in the huge space. A figure emerged from the deeper darkness near the kitchen island. It wasn't Maya. It was a man, large, and wearing a dark suit that seemed to absorb the ambient light. He was holding something that glinted faintly. He didn't move fast, but his presence filled the room with an icy certainty. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a party, and this definitely wasn't a prank. "You must be the friend," the man said, his voice flat, American, and utterly devoid of emotion. It sounded like an official pronouncement. My mind raced. Friend? How did he know? And where was Maya? I took a nervous step back toward the door, realizing too late that I had cornered myself. I just got a text. Where is she? The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step toward me, and the glinting object became clearer. A large, intimidating phone, not a weapon, thank God. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the doorway behind me, the one leading to the main living area. "She's in the office," he stated, finally looking at me with eyes that were utterly blank. She needed someone to be seen coming up here. A distraction. My confusion boiled over into frustration. A distraction? She had texted me, woken me up, and put me in a dark room with a guy who looked like a bodyguard just to be a decoy? A distraction from what? I demanded, louder than I intended. Before he could answer, a loud, sharp crash echoed from the back of the apartment, followed immediately by the sound of glass shattering. The man's blank expression finally broke into a frown of intense, focused annoyance. He glanced back at me, then back toward the noise. "Stay right here," he commanded, his voice now lower, dangerous. He pocketed his phone and began moving silently toward the sound of the wreckage. I knew, absolutely knew, I should listen to him. But the crash had sounded like someone was truly hurt, or truly destroying something important. This was the moment. The man was preoccupied, moving away. Was Maya really in the office? And what exactly was she distracting this guy from? I took a breath and made the choice. I wasn't going to stay put. I was going to find out what was going on. I started to move, not toward the front door, but quietly trailing the dark suit, heading straight into the unknown. But as I rounded the corner, just before I could see the office door, I saw something else entirely. Alex's backpack, the one he claimed was safely locked in his room, sitting abandoned and ripped open on the hardwood floor. What was Alex's backpack doing 3 floors up, near the office where Maya was supposedly hiding? And why was it empty? Seeing Alex's backpack, the beat-up, green canvas one he treated like a briefcase, was a punch to the gut. The bodyguard, or whatever he was still moving toward the source of the crash, now completely out of sight. I stopped, staring at the open bag. This wasn't just Maya's drama anymore. This was Alex's. My roommate hadn't just been sleeping soundly downstairs. He was clearly involved. I knelt quickly, my heart hammering against the expensive hardwood floor. The backpack was empty, save for a crumpled receipt from a specialty electronics store and a small, worn photograph of Alex and Maya when they were kids, sitting on a tricycle. It was sweet, completely out of place, and strangely unsettling. Why the rushed exit? Why the ripped bag? I heard a muffled exchange of voices coming from the office area, the bodyguard's low growl, and another voice, high and panicked, but definitely not Maya's. Where was Maya? I realized my mistake. I had assumed the text was from her, to me. But if she was in the office, and the bodyguard was looking for something, maybe she hadn't sent the text at all. Maybe the message, "Come upstairs, but don't knock," was the key to this entire twisted situation, a signal, a diversion, or something worse. I crept forward, using the shadow cast by a massive abstract sculpture as cover. I reached the doorway that opened into the office suite. The scene inside was chaotic. Bookshelves were tipped over, papers scattered everywhere, and a window was indeed shattered, letting in a chilling draft. The bodyguard was focused on a shaking young woman in the far corner, yelling something I couldn't quite decipher about a hard drive. And that's when I saw Maya. She wasn't in the office. She was across the room, near a hidden service entrance I hadn't noticed before, tucked behind a tall mirror. She was holding a small, metallic flash drive, and she was watching the scene unfold with an expression of pure, calculating focus. She was the conductor of this chaos. Our eyes locked across the ruined room. It was only for a second, but in that moment, she conveyed a silent, urgent message. Run. Now, but running wasn't an option. The bodyguard was too close to the main exit. If I ran, he'd hear me. I had to create a bigger distraction. Just as the bodyguard lunged toward the cornered woman, I acted. I reached out and violently pulled the huge sculpture I was hiding behind. It was heavier than I thought, but with a screech of tearing metal, it crashed to the ground, missing me by inches, making a colossal, deafening sound that swallowed every other noise in the penthouse. The bodyguard spun around, furious, instantly locking onto me. His eyes were no longer blank. They were burning with lethal intent. He took 3 fast strides toward me. I backed up quickly, stumbling over Alex's abandoned backpack. "You," he snarled, his hand reaching inside his jacket this time. "You shouldn't have moved." I knew this was it. I was seconds away from a physical confrontation with a professional. My mind was screaming for an explanation, for the reason I was standing in a stranger's penthouse defending a young woman I didn't know, while the one who had invited me was poised to escape. But before he could pull whatever he was reaching for, a voice cut across the room, completely unexpected and carrying the weight of ultimate authority. "Stop." I looked past the enraged bodyguard, toward the wreckage of the office. Standing in the middle of the scattered papers and broken glass was Alex, my roommate. But this wasn't the predictable, organized Alex I knew. He looked terrified, yes, but also grimly determined, and in his hands, He held the one thing that changed everything. The reason Maya had texted me, and the reason I couldn't knock, was now finally clear. And I realized, with a sickening lurch, that Maya's chaotic plan wasn't just about escape. It was about getting him out of the firing line. What was Alex holding that made a professional killer freeze in his tracks? I squinted past the hulking figure of the bodyguard. Alex was standing perfectly still, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. In his hands, he held a sleek, black drone. A small, sophisticated piece of equipment I recognized as one he'd been quietly assembling in our apartment for weeks. But it wasn't the drone itself that froze the scene, it was what was attached to it. Taped carefully to the drone's undercarriage was a thick, manila envelope, sealed with a distinctive, corporate-looking red wax stamp. As the bodyguard stared, transfixed, Alex's hands shook, and the envelope slipped, tearing slightly at the corner. Through the rip, I saw a glimpse of its contents, a stack of crisp, $100 bills, enough to buy a small car. This wasn't research, it was a payoff. But the real twist wasn't the money. It was the moment Alex opened his mouth, not to plead, but to speak to the bodyguard in a low, formal tone. "It's not here," Alex said, his voice surprisingly steady. "The exchange was upstairs, exactly where the text said it would be. But I only brought the decoy. She has the real package." The bodyguard didn't even need to ask who she was. Both of us immediately spun our heads toward the service entrance. Maya was gone. The flash drive, the distraction, the panic. It had all been a diversion orchestrated by Alex and Maya, not just to escape, but to pull off an elaborate sting. The problem? Alex had just revealed the true target, and now the bodyguard knew exactly what he was after, and that his main asset had just vanished with it. Now the real hunt was on, and it wasn't for money or a drive. It was for the thing hidden within that hard drive, and Maya had just become the most valuable and most vulnerable person in the city. The bodyguard, his focus now razor-sharp, lunged past me toward Alex. His training was evident. He moved with silent, brutal efficiency, intending to subdue Alex and find out where Maya had gone and what the real package was. But Alex, despite his terror, had a plan, or at least a practiced reaction. As the bodyguard closed the distance, Alex didn't run. Instead, he slammed his hand down on a hidden button tucked beneath the expensive Persian rug. A high-pitched, piercing alarm immediately began blaring through the penthouse. Not a fire alarm, but a security siren designed to wake up the entire block. Simultaneously, a reinforced metal screen slid down, sealing off the shattered office area where Alex was trapped. He was now separated from the bodyguard, but also sealed off from any escape route. It was a calculated, desperate move to buy time. The bodyguard skidded to a stop, his eyes darting between the impenetrable metal screen and the apartment's front door, which was now flashing with red security lights. He was trapped between a sealed target and a rapidly escalating alarm. He glanced at me, realizing I was a liability, but also a potential witness. "You," he growled, pointing at me. "Who are you working for?" I couldn't speak, completely overwhelmed. Then, a voice, calm and clear, cut through the alarm noise, echoing from a small speaker near the fireplace. It was Maya. "He's working for me. Victor," she said, using the bodyguard's name. "And so is the city police department, which is now 3 minutes away." The voice sounded like it was being broadcast from outside the apartment, maybe the parking lot. The woman Maya had cornered in the office, Alex's supposed research assistant, stood up, no longer shaking, and pressed a sequence on a tablet. The metal screen covering the office door retracted slightly, revealing Alex, who now held up the sleek drone. "The real package isn't the drive," Alex announced, his voice amplified by a tiny microphone built into the drone. "The real package is the camera feed from the drone. It just live-streamed your boss's entire conversation about the money laundering scheme straight to the federal authorities. You were so busy tracking the physical items, you forgot about the data." The bodyguard, Victor, hesitated for a split second. That's all it took. He realized the elaborate sting. Maya's text to me, the "don't knock" instruction to ensure I created a necessary diversion, Alex's fake drop, and the staged panic. It wasn't about him finding a drive. It was about the setup capturing him on video, confirming his involvement. Victor made one final, desperate move. He lunged for the front door, slamming his weight against it. But the door didn't budge. He spun around, fury etched on his face, ready to fight his way out. Then, the final twist hit. As Victor turned, his phone, which he had pocketed earlier, rang loudly. It was the generic ringtone of a blocked number. Victor snatched it out and pressed answer, his face grim. He held it to his ear for less than 2 seconds, his eyes wide in absolute shock, before the phone slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Impossible, he whispered, his entire body deflating. He was supposed to be protected. The camera feed from the little drone, still broadcasting, suddenly zoomed in on the shattered window of the office. And there, reflected in the broken pane, was the faint, blurry image of a small, flashing blue light. A police cruiser, not 3 minutes, but 30 seconds away, turning the corner. But Victor hadn't collapsed because of the police. He'd collapsed because of the one person he thought was safe. The voice on the phone wasn't a warning. It was a notification of a complete, crushing failure. What had the voice on the other end of the line said that completely shattered the composure of a highly trained operative, even more than the imminent arrival of the police? The sound of sirens was already screaming outside, climbing the building. Victor, the bodyguard, stood motionless, staring at his discarded phone as if it had delivered a fatal diagnosis. The young woman in the office, the one Alex had introduced as his research assistant, crossed the room and gently retrieved the phone, sliding it into a shielded pouch. The moment of danger had passed. I was still kneeling by Alex's backpack, trying to process the fact that my quiet, predictable roommate was a key operative in what was clearly a massive undercover sting operation, possibly involving federal authorities. Alex stepped out from behind the metal screen, rubbing the tension from his neck. He looked exhausted, but the rigid fear was gone, replaced by a deep, tired relief. "It's over, Victor," Alex said, his student voice completely gone, replaced by something official and grave. "Your boss, Mr. Sterling, was arrested in his private hangar 30 minutes ago." The voice on the phone was the head of his legal team, confirming his custody. "We got everything." The puzzle pieces clicked into place. The late-night calls, the black sedan, the paranoia. Alex hadn't been studying research. He and Maya were working together to expose Sterling, a high-level figure involved in industrial espionage and money laundering who had somehow pulled Maya into his orbit, maybe through her tech consulting. Maya's charisma and connections had been their entry point. Alex's meticulous planning and technical skills had been the exit strategy. But why the elaborate text to me? I stood up, feeling a wave of residual adrenaline. The text? Why bring me into this, Maya? Before I could finish, the front door lock was overridden, and 2 plainclothes officers rushed in, followed by Maya. She looked immaculate, despite having just slipped away from a professional bodyguard. She walked straight past the officers, past Victor, and stopped right in front of me. It wasn't about the distraction, not entirely, she admitted, her eyes suddenly softer than I'd ever seen them. Alex and I needed to know if, when things got chaotic, there was anyone he could rely on, someone who operates on pure gut instinct instead of logic. Alex is all logic. I needed to see if you would follow a ridiculous, rule-breaking text, knowing it was dangerous. I needed to see if you had the courage to break your own quiet life for someone else. You did. She reached out and briefly touched my arm, sending a jolt through me. You were the chaos in his calm tonight, and he needed that chaos to win. We needed you to move when Victor told you to stop. You were our true contingency plan. Alex walked over, giving Victor a wide berth as the man was silently handcuffed. He clapped me on the shoulder, a true, relieved smile finally breaking through. Thanks, man. Seriously, we'll explain everything. Just, maybe don't mention the covert ops part to the dean. The apartment quickly emptied out. Maya gave the officers the flash drive and the drone's recording device. Before she left with them, she paused at the door. I'm heading out of the city for a while, getting debriefed. Alex will cover for you. We'll talk when this is all over. She gave me one last look, that intense, scrutinizing gaze, but this time it held a hint of admiration. I was left standing in the ruins of the penthouse, the sirens fading, the silence heavier than before. My life, which had been so neat and carefully managed, was now undeniably messy. I had broken the rule. I had gotten involved with Maya's drama. But in doing so, I hadn't just helped them. I had discovered something about myself. I wasn't just Team Calm. When the moment came, I was willing to step into the fire. I walked back down the 3 flights of stairs, this time slow and steady, carrying nothing but a powerful secret. I got back to our apartment. Alex's snoring was gone, replaced by the sound of him quietly packing a small duffel bag. I stood in the doorway and looked at my roommate, the guy I thought I knew everything about. He looked up, gave me a small, weary smile, and zipped the bag shut. "Chaos is sometimes necessary," he murmured, grabbing his jacket. "I learned that tonight. Now, want to know the craziest part?" I nodded, ready for anything. "The craziest part," Alex whispered, turning off the lights and walking out the door, "is that Maya wasn't lying about the tech consulting job. That was actually the cover for everything else. But she never actually worked there. The CEO is Sterling. So all this time, the entire operation was being funded by the guy we were trying to take down." He pulled the door shut, leaving me standing in the dark. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. Funding their own capture. Maya truly was chaos, and now I knew exactly why I loved every bit of it, too.